The first letter of your name is controlling your life and you don't even realize it. It is not a metaphor. It's not cheap self-help. It's pure psychological science that Carl Jung discovered after decades of analyzing human minds. Do you think you make free choices? Lie. Your personality, your decisions, your relationships, all of this is being shaped by a psychological code that has been implanted in your mind since you were a child. And this code has a name, the first letter of your name. Jung discovered something disturbing. People with names that start with the same letter develop nearly identical behavioral patterns. It's no coincidence. It's mental programming. Every time you hear your name, every time you write it, you are reinforcing a specific psychological script in your unconscious. Want a brutal example? People with names that start with A are obsessed with control and authority. Those who have a name with an M carry melancholy and self-destructive tendencies. Names with R create compulsive rebels who sabotage their own successes. You are living a life that is not yours. It's following a psychological script that was etched into your mind before you even knew who it was. It's like being a robot that thinks it has free will. The scariest part, you've probably been repeating the same mistakes, the same patterns, the same self-sabotages for years without understanding why. Because you don't know that there is a program running in your unconscious dictating your reactions. Jung called this the name complex, an invisible psychic structure that acts as a filter through which you interpret all of reality. You don't see the world as it is. You see the world through the lens of the first letter of your name. But here's the good news. When you understand this mechanism, you can hack your own mind. You can identify when you are acting on autopilot and consciously choose how to react. You can stop being a slave to your own complexes. This video will shatter your illusions about free will and show you exactly how your mind is being manipulated by the first letter of your name. It will teach you how to recognize these patterns and, more importantly, how to transcend them. Because true freedom does not come from ignoring these mechanisms. It comes from understanding them completely and using that knowledge to become who you really are, not who your unconscious programming wants you to be. Get ready to discover truths about yourself that will bother you deeply, and prepare to never be the same after this video. 1. Alphabetical code. Jung discovered something that will blow your mind. Each letter of the alphabet carries a specific psychological frequency that programs behaviors from childhood. It is not mysticism. It is neuroscience applied to depth psychology that he developed after decades of analyzing patients. The first letter of your name works like a mental chip implanted in your brain. Every time you hear your name being called, that letter reinforces specific neural patterns. It's like an unconscious mantra that you repeat thousands of times throughout your life, shaping your personality without you realizing you're being programmed. Jung observed that people with names beginning with A develop an obsession with authority and control. They need to always be in charge, even when it hurts them severely. It is a neurological compulsion, not a conscious choice. The letter A activates brain circuits related to dominance and competitiveness, creating natural leaders who often become household tyrants. Those who have a name with a B carry the weight of the constant search for external approval. These people live to please others, sacrificing their authenticity on the altar of social acceptance. The letter B resonates with frequencies of submission and emotional dependence. They become experts at reading other people's moods and adapting their behavior to avoid conflict, losing themselves completely in the process. Names that begin with C create controlling personalities, masquerading as careful. They manipulate situations through excessive care, using worry as a subtle tool for emotional control. The letter C activates patterns of obsessive protection that stifle relationships and prevent the natural growth of the people around them. The letter D programs self-destructive determination that confuses persistence with stubbornness. These people persist even when they should give up, turning willpower into systematic self-sabotage. They confuse stubbornness with strong character, destroying valuable opportunities by excessive pride and mental inflexibility. Jung realized that the letter E creates addicts to external stimuli who cannot find inner peace. These people can't be alone. They constantly need validation and entertainment to feel alive. Their energy is completely dependent on their environment, like emotional parasites that drain the vitality of others without realizing it. Names with F develop paralyzing perfectionism that prevents any kind of real progress. They would rather do nothing than do something imperfect, living in a mental prison of impossible standards. The letter F activates circuits of destructive self-criticism that hinder action and growth, creating a deep existential paralysis. The letter G programs compensatory grandiosity to hide deep feelings of inadequacy. These people create elaborate fantasies of superiority to mask a destroyed self-esteem. They live on a constant emotional roller coaster between inflated megalomania and devastating depression. This alphabetic code is not an immutable destination. It is programming that can be reprogrammed through consciousness, but first you need to recognize that you are being controlled by something that you didn't even know existed in your psyche. 2. Invisible control. You wake up, brush your teeth, drink coffee, and go to work. Do you think you are making conscious and free choices? Jung would tell you that you are operating on autopilot, following psychological scripts activated by the first letter of your name without being aware of it. This control is invisible because it works through what Jung called psychic automatisms. These are programmed reactions that happen even before conscious thought forms in your mind. The first letter of your name acts as a subliminal trigger that triggers these automatisms completely unconsciously. Imagine that your mind is a sophisticated computer. The first letter of its name is like a malicious program that runs in the background, influencing all other operations without appearing on the main screen. You see only the end results of your decisions, never the hidden code that's driving those results. Jung observed that people with names beginning with L always choose the longest, most complicated path to solving simple problems. They complicate basic situations because the letter L activates neurological patterns of over-elaboration. It is not laziness or natural incompetence. It is neurological programming that literally prevents them from seeing direct and efficient solutions. Those who have a name with an M make decisions based on unconscious melancholy that contaminates all perception of reality. These people naturally gravitate to choices that confirm a pessimistic outlook on life. The letter M works as a distorted mental filter that highlights negative aspects and systematically minimizes positive possibilities. Names that begin with N create patterns of compulsive denial that destroy opportunities. These people automatically say no, even when they should say yes for their own good. The letter N programs resistance as the default defense mechanism, preventing valuable opportunities and personal growth. The letter O controls through the pathological obsession with order and organization. These people cannot relax in minimally disorganized environments. They spend excessive mental energy trying to control irrelevant external variables, completely losing focus on what really matters to their happiness. Jung discovered that the letter P creates pathological procrastination disguised as sophisticated perfectionism. These people postpone important decisions indefinitely, always finding elaborate excuses for not acting. Control happens through mental paralysis, not productive action. Names beginning with Q develop compulsive questioning that prevents any kind of effective decision. These people overanalyze every situation, missing precious opportunities while searching for certainties that simply don't exist in real life. The letter R controls through automatic and irrational rebellion. These people resist authority even when the authority is completely right. They confuse genuine independence with systematic opposition, sabotaging relationships and opportunities out of pure conditioned reflex. The most disturbing thing is that you don't notice this control happening in real time. You think you're being authentic, but you're actually being a programmed version of yourself. 3. Programmed relationships. Do you think you choose your partners out of love, attraction, or compatibility? Jung discovered something devastating. The first letter of your name programs you to be attracted to specific types of people, creating relational patterns that repeat like a scratched record throughout your entire life. This programming happens because your first letter creates an unconscious emotional mold that determines what kind of energy you seek in relationships. It's no coincidence that you always end up with the same kind of problematic person. It's pure psychological programming working behind the scenes of your love life. Jung observed that people with names beginning with A are compulsively attracted to submissive partners who feed their need for control. They cannot relate to equals because the letter A programs dominance as a form of love. These people confuse control with care, destroying relationships through possessiveness disguised as protection. Those who have a name with B unconsciously seek partners who reject them or treat them badly. The letter B is attracted to people who are unavailable, married, addicted, or emotionally distant. They become addicted to the drama of impossible conquest, confusing suffering with true passion. Names that begin with C create patterns of destructive codependency. These people are attracted to problematic partners who need to be saved or fixed. The letter C programs the need to be indispensable, transforming relationships into emotional rehabilitation projects doomed to failure. The letter D programs attraction for dramatic and unstable relationships. These people get bored with balanced partners and get addicted to emotional roller coasters. They confuse intensity with intimacy, creating explosive relationships that always end in mutual destruction. Jung realized that the letter E creates pathological emotional dependence in relationships. These people completely lose their identity when they fall in love, becoming extensions of their partner. They cannot exist alone and turn love into suffocation, scaring away healthy people. Names with F develop relationship patterns based on unrealistic fantasies. These people fall in love with potentials, not realities. The letter F programs compulsive idealization that prevents seeing obvious defects in the partner, creating devastating disappointments when reality appears. The letter G programs relationships based on power games and competition. These people turn love into war, always trying to prove superiority over their partner. They can't be vulnerable and use relationships as a stage to feed their wounded ego. Jung discovered that the letter H creates patterns of superficial relationships based on humor and entertainment. These people avoid real intimacy through jokes and constant fun. They are terrified of deep conversations and sabotage relationships when things get too serious. Names starting with I program emotional isolation even within relationships. These people maintain invisible walls that prevent genuine connection. They sabotage intimacy at the exact moment it begins to develop, preferring solitude to vulnerability. The letter J creates relationships based on constant mutual judgment. These people transform partners into improvement projects, always pointing out defects and demanding changes. They cannot accept people as they are, creating toxic atmospheres of permanent criticism. Names with K develop relationship patterns based on rigid emotional contracts. These people treat love as a business, always calculating who is giving more or receiving less. They kill spontaneity through obsessive emotional accounting. The scariest thing is that you repeat these patterns automatically, relationship after relationship, thinking it's bad luck or fate. In fact, it's your first letter programming you to always choose the same type of problematic person who confirms your unconscious complexes. 4. Predestined career. His professional choice was not free. It was programmed by the first letter of its name, in ways that Jung found to be frighteningly predictable. Do you think you chose your career for talent, passion, or opportunity? In fact, it was directed by unconscious impulses activated by the psychological charge of its first letter. Jung noted that there is a striking statistical correlation between first letters of names and career choices. It's no coincidence. It is mental programming that directs you to specific areas where you can express the psychological complexes activated by your initial letter. People with names beginning with A compulsively gravitate to positions of leadership and authority. They become CEOs, politicians, directors, or entrepreneurs, not out of natural competence, but because the letter A programs an obsessive need to be in charge. Many fail miserably because they confuse authority with competence. Those who have a name with a B choose support and assistance professions. They become secretaries, assistants, nurses, or therapists because the letter B programs need to be useful and indispensable. These people rarely take on professional protagonism, preferring to shine through the success of others. Names that begin with C create professionals who are obsessed with caring for and controlling others. They become doctors, psychologists, teachers, or managers because the letter C programs need to supervise and protect. Many develop burnout syndrome from taking on excessive responsibilities. The letter D programs careers based on raw determination and persistence. These people choose professions that require extreme physical or mental endurance: athletes, military personnel, lawyers, or surgeons. They confuse stubbornness with dedication, often destroying health by obstinacy. Jung realized that the letter E directs to careers that rely on external energy and social interaction. These people become salespeople, presenters, actors, or public relations because they need constant stimulation. They fail in solitary jobs or jobs that require prolonged concentration. Names with F choose creative or perfectionist professions. They become artists, designers, architects, or publishers because the letter F program obsessively searches for beauty and perfection. Many never finish projects because nothing meets their impossible standards. The letter G programs grandiose careers that feed the ego. These people choose prestigious professions: judges, university professors, medical specialists, or executives of large corporations. They prioritize status over personal satisfaction, creating empty professional lives. Jung discovered that the letter H directs to careers based on hospitality and humor. These people become comedians, waiters, hostesses, or event planners because they need to constantly please and entertain. They avoid serious professions that require confrontation or difficult decisions. Names beginning with I choose solitary careers that allow total independence. They become writers, programmers, researchers, or freelancers because the letter I programs aversion to hierarchies and teamwork. Many sabotage growth opportunities that require collaboration. The letter J programs careers based on judgment and analysis. These people become lawyers, auditors, critics, or consultants because they have to constantly evaluate and criticize. They become addicted to finding problems, becoming professionally destructive. The most disturbing thing is that you're probably in a career that you didn't consciously choose. He is following a professional script programmed by his first letter, confusing unconscious compulsion with genuine vocation. Your professional life may be wasted serving psychological complexes instead of expressing your true potential. 5. Destructive patterns. You're stuck in cycles of self-sabotage that have been repeating for years, and you don't understand why. Jung discovered that the first letter of his name programs specific destructive patterns that work like mental viruses, infecting all areas of his life with behaviors that sabotage his own success and happiness. These patterns are invisible because they operate on the unconscious level, automatically activated whenever you get closer to something good in life. It's as if your first letter is an internal saboteur programmed to destroy any real progress you try to make. Jung observed that people with names beginning with L develop patterns of destructive procrastination disguised as perfectionism. They postpone important decisions until they miss out on valuable opportunities, always finding elaborate excuses for not acting. The letter L programs paralysis through excessive analysis, transforming thought into mental prison. Those who have a name with an M create patterns of self-destructive melancholy that contaminate everything around them. These people sabotage happy moments through compulsive pessimism, always finding reasons to worry or suffer. The letter M programs addiction into suffering, making them feel uncomfortable with genuine joy. Names that begin with N develop patterns of systematic negation that impede growth. These people automatically reject opportunities, advice, or positive changes. The letter N programs resistance as a survival mechanism, transforming protection into chronic self-sabotage. The letter O creates obsessive patterns that drain mental energy into irrelevant details. These people get lost in compulsive organization, losing focus on what really matters. They spend more time organizing their lives than they do living, creating a sterile and controlled existence. Jung realized that the letter P programs paralyzing perfectionist patterns that prevent any real progress. These people prefer not to try rather than risk failure, living mediocre lives for fear of imperfection. They sabotage projects at the beginning through impossible standards. Names with Q develop patterns of destructive questioning that prevent decisions. These people overanalyze each situation, missing opportunities while looking for certainties that do not exist. The letter Q programs paralysis through perpetual doubt, transforming prudence into cowardice. The letter R creates patterns of self-destructive rebellion that sabotage authority and necessary structures. These people resist rules even when the rules benefit them, destroying relationships and opportunities out of pure opposition. They confuse independence with destructiveness. Jung discovered that the letter S programs patterns of toxic silence that accumulate resentment. These people avoid necessary conflicts, allowing problems to accumulate until they explode destructively. They sabotage relationships through passive-aggressive communication and late emotional outbursts. Names beginning with T create patterns of temporal rigidity that destroy spontaneity and opportunities. These people become slaves to timelines, missing precious moments and human connections by obsessing over efficiency. The letter T programs temporal anxiety that turns life into a race against the clock. The letter U develops patterns of compulsive uniformity that erases individuality. These people adapt excessively to the environment, losing their own identity in the process. They become social chameleons who no longer know who they really are underneath the adaptive masks. Names with V program patterns of chronic victimization that attract problems and drama. These people unconsciously put themselves in problematic situations to confirm their worldview as victims. They become addicted to the role of sufferers, sabotaging solutions that would eliminate the drama. The letter W creates patterns of obsessive worry that paralyzes through fear. These people live anticipating catastrophes that rarely happen, wasting mental energy in imaginary scenarios. They sabotage the present through anxiety about futures that will probably never exist. The scariest thing is that you repeat these patterns automatically, thinking it's personality or destiny. In fact, they are destructive programming that can be identified and reprogrammed when you understand how they work. 6. Nominal shadow. Your first letter carries a psychological shadow that you vehemently deny, but which controls your life in devastating ways. Jung discovered that each letter of the alphabet has specific dark aspects that people consciously reject, but which manifest themselves unconsciously through destructive behaviors and self-sabotage. The nominal shadow is the most dangerous part of programming the first letter because it operates completely outside of consciousness. You don't see these aspects in yourself, but they leak through actions, choices, and patterns that systematically destroy everything you try to build in life. Jung observed that people with names beginning with X carry a shadow of destructive extremism that manifests itself through radical behaviors and impulsive decisions. They deny being extremists, but sabotage stability through drastic and unnecessary changes. The letter X programs an unconscious need to create chaos when life gets too predictable. Those who have a name with a Y have a shadow of paralyzing indecision disguised as flexibility. These people pride themselves on being open to possibilities, but are actually unable to commit to anything. The letter Y programs escape from responsibility through perpetual ambiguity, sabotaging relationships and projects. Names that begin with Z carry a shadow of existential laziness, masquerading as tranquility. These people see themselves as zen and balanced, but they actually avoid challenges and growth. The letter Z programs stagnation through conformity, creating mediocre lives disguised as wisdom. Going back to the beginning of the alphabet, the letter A has a shadow of tyranny disguised as leadership. These people deny being controlling, but destroy the autonomy of others through micromanagement and manipulation. They confuse domination with protection, creating suffocating relationships. The shadow of the letter B is pathological submission, masquerading as kindness. These people pride themselves on being helpful, but they're actually unable to set healthy boundaries. They become emotional doormats that fuel abusive behaviors in others. Names with C carry a shadow of obsessive control disguised as care. These people deny being controlling, but manipulate situations through excessive worry. They suffocate loved ones in the name of love, preventing growth and independence. The letter D has a shadow of destructiveness masked as determination. These people see themselves as persistent, but they are actually stubborn to the point of self-destruction. They destroy opportunities out of pride, confusing obstinacy with strength of character. Jung realized that the shadow of the letter E is energetic vampirism disguised as sociability. These people deny being dependent, but they constantly drain other people's energy. They become emotional black holes that suck vitality from others to feel alive. The letter F carries a shadow of destructive perfectionism, masquerading as excellence. These people pride themselves on having high standards, but they are actually unable to accept human imperfection. They destroy projects and relationships through criticism that is impossible to satisfy. Names beginning with G have a shadow of pathological narcissism disguised as self-confidence. These people deny being self-centered, but they make everything revolve around their own needs. They use others as mirrors to feed a hungry and insatiable ego. The most dangerous thing about the nominal shadow is that you can't see it in yourself. Other people clearly perceive these destructive patterns, but you deny them or rationalize them as virtues. This psychological blindness keeps you trapped in cycles of self-sabotage that seem to come out of nowhere. Thirst, fake person. You are not who you think you are. The person you introduce to the world is a psychological mask constructed by the first letter of your name, And Jung discovered that this false persona is preventing you from living your authentic life. You became an actor, playing a character you didn't even consciously choose. The persona is the social face you use to navigate the world, but when it's programmed by the first letter of your name, it becomes a psychological prison. You become so identified with this mask that you forget who you really are underneath it, living a life that belongs to the character, not to your true essence. Jung observed that people with names beginning with A develop an authoritarian leadership persona that hides deep insecurity and fear of inadequacy. They present themselves as confident and controlling, but inside they are frightened children who use domination to mask vulnerability. The true personality gets buried under layers of forced dominant behavior. Those who have a name with a B create a persona of a helpful and submissive person who hides repressed anger and deep resentment. They present themselves as kind and accommodating, but inside they seethe with irritation that they can never express their true needs. The mask of kindness becomes an emotional straitjacket. Names that begin with C develop a protective caregiver persona that hides unmet self-needs and deep emotional needs. They present themselves as people who have everything under control, but inside they are empty and desperate for care. The obsession with caring for others is an escape from themselves. The letter D creates a persona of unwavering determination that hides paralyzing doubts and fear of failure. These people present themselves as solid rocks, but inside they are fragile and insecure. External stubbornness is a compensation for internal uncertainty that they cannot admit. Jung realized that the letter E programs a persona of a sociable and energetic person who hides deep loneliness and existential emptiness. They present themselves as extroverted and happy, but inside they feel disconnected and empty. The constant need for external stimuli is an escape from one's own company. Names with an F develop a persona of a demanding perfectionist who hides feelings of inadequacy and fear of judgment. They present themselves as people with high standards, but inside they are terrified by the possibility of being seen as imperfect. Perfectionism is an armor against criticism. The letter G creates a persona of grandiosity and superiority that hides deep feelings of inferiority and inadequacy. These people present themselves as special and superior, but inside they feel small and insignificant. Arrogance is a desperate compensation for low self-esteem. Jung discovered that the letter H programs a persona of a fun and hospitable person who hides deep depression and hopelessness. They present themselves as cheerful clowns, but inside they carry overwhelming sadness. Constant humor is a mask for not facing one's own emotional pain. Names beginning with I develop a persona of total independence that hides a desperate need for connection and fear of abandonment. They present themselves as self-sufficient, but inside they crave genuine intimacy. Isolation is a protection against the vulnerability of needing someone. The letter J creates a persona of a fair and critical person who hides destructive self-criticism and self-hatred. These people present themselves as moral judges, but inside they condemn themselves mercilessly. Criticism of others is a projection of the violence they do to themselves. Names with K program a persona of an organized and efficient person who hides internal chaos and fear of losing control. They present themselves as competent and structured, but inside they feel disorganized and lost. External rigidity is an attempt to control internal chaos. The letter L develops a persona of a logical and rational person who hides intense emotions and fear of his own irrationality. These people present themselves as cerebral and controlled, but inside they are emotional volcanoes. Excessive rationality is an escape from one's own feelings. The most tragic thing about the fake persona is that you can spend your whole life playing a character you hate without ever finding out who you really are. You become a prisoner of your own mask, living a life that is not yours. 8. Pattern break. Now that you've seen how you're being controlled by the first letter of your name, the crucial moment has arrived. Learning how to identify when these patterns are operating and how to break the cycle of unconscious programming. Jung discovered that consciousness is the only tool capable of freeing you from this psychological prison. The pattern breaking begins with what Jung called non-judgmental observation. You need to become a detective of your own mind, capturing the exact moments when the programming of your first letter takes control of your decisions and behaviors. The first sign that you are operating on autopilot is the absence of conscious choice. When you react automatically to situations without pausing to think, it's likely that you're following the script of your first letter. Jung taught that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is your freedom. For people with names beginning with A, the breakdown moment happens when you feel the compulsion to take control in situations where it's not necessary. Stop, breathe. Ask yourself, do I really need to lead this, or is it my dominance programming speaking? True leadership comes from conscious choice, not unconscious compulsion. Those who have a name with a B should be aware of the automatic impulse to please or submit. When you feel like saying yes right away, pause and question, do I really want to do this? Or am I just avoiding conflict? Breakdown happens when you consciously choose your battles instead of avoiding all of them. Names that start with C need to identify the moment when they start to worry excessively about others. When you feel the compulsion to save someone or control a situation through care, ask yourself, does this person really need my help, or am I projecting my need to feel useful? The letter D requires attention to the impulse to persist when you should give up. When you catch yourself being stubborn or inflexible, pause and question, am I being determined for a good reason or just out of pride? The real strength sometimes lies in knowing when to stop. Jung realized that the letter E needs constant vigilance over the need for external stimuli. When you feel restless or bored alone, instead of seeking immediate distraction, stay with the discomfort. Ask yourself, what am I avoiding feeling that makes me need constant entertainment? Names with an F should capture the moment when perfectionism paralyzes action. When you catch yourself putting something off because it's not perfect, force yourself to act even with imperfection. Breakdown happens when you choose progress over perfection. The letter G requires attention to moments of compensatory grandeur. When you feel superior or special, pause and question, am I feeling this way because I really am special, or because I am compensating for feelings of inadequacy? Genuine humility breaks the cycle of ego inflation. Jung discovered that the letter H needs to identify when using humor to avoid emotional depth. When you find yourself cracking jokes in serious moments, ask yourself, am I being genuinely funny, or am I running away from an important conversation? Breakdown happens when you allow seriousness and vulnerability. Names beginning with I should watch the impulse to isolate themselves when things get intimate. When you feel like walking away, force yourself to stay and communicate what you're feeling. Breakage happens when you choose connection instead of protective insulation. The key to breaking any pattern is to create what Jung called the space of consciousness between the trigger and the reaction. In this space, you can choose to respond consciously rather than react automatically. 9. Mental reprogramming. Now that you've identified the destructive patterns of your first letter, it's time to actively reprogram your mind. Jung developed specific techniques that allow overwriting unconscious programming and creating new neural circuits based on conscious choices rather than automatic reflexes. Mental reprogramming doesn't happen overnight. It is a process that requires discipline, consistency, and courage to face deep internal resistance. Your mind will fight against these changes because old patterns, even if they are destructive, offer a sense of security and predictability. Jung found that the most powerful technique for reprogramming is what he called active confrontation with the complex. This means that rather than avoiding situations that activate your nominal programming, you should deliberately expose yourself to them and consciously choose a different response. For people with names beginning with A, reprogramming involves deliberately practicing submission and collaboration. When your control compulsion arises, force yourself to ask others for their opinions and follow other people's suggestions, even when you think you have a better idea. This breaks the neural circuit of automatic dominance. Those who have a name with B need to practice assertiveness and healthy confrontation. When you feel like pleasing automatically, force yourself to express an opposing opinion or set a limit. Start with small situations and gradually work your way up. Reprogramming happens through the repeated practice of saying no. Names that begin with C should practice detachment and allow others to make their own mistakes. When the compulsion to care arises, force yourself to take a step back and let the person sort it out on their own. This is extremely uncomfortable at first, but essential to breaking the pattern of codependency. The letter D requires deliberate practice of flexibility and admission of error. When you catch yourself being stubborn, force yourself to consider other perspectives and, if necessary, change your mind publicly. Reprogramming happens when you choose adaptability over rigidity. Jung realized that the letter E needs forced periods of solitude and introspection. When you feel the need for external stimuli, force yourself to be alone without distractions for increasing periods. Start with 15 minutes and work your way up. This develops tolerance for one's own company and reduces external dependence. Names with F should deliberately practice imperfection and incomplete action. Force yourself to deliver good enough projects rather than perfect ones. Publish texts with small errors, deliver presentations without obsessively revising. Reprogramming happens when you choose progress over perfection. The letter G requires humble practice of recognizing one's own limitations and celebrating the successes of others. When you feel superior, force yourself to genuinely praise other people and admit areas where you're mediocre. This breaks the cycle of ego inflation. Jung discovered that the letter H needs to practice seriousness and emotional depth. When the compulsion to make jokes arises in serious moments, force yourself to be silent and allow the gravity of the situation to be felt. Practice deep conversations without using humor as an outlet. Names beginning with I should deliberately practice vulnerability and healthy dependence. Force yourself to ask for help, share personal problems, and accept support from others. Start with small vulnerabilities and gradually work your way up. Reprogramming happens when you choose connection rather than isolation. The letter J requires practice of acceptance and suspension of judgment. When the compulsion to criticize arises, force yourself to find 3 positive aspects in the person or situation before you express any criticism. This develops new neural circuits of appreciation. Jung emphasized that reprogramming only works through conscious opposite action. You must do exactly the opposite of what your nominal programming dictates over and over again until new standards are established. It's uncomfortable, but it's the only path to real psychological freedom. The key is to start small and be consistent. Each time you consciously choose a response other than the programmed one, you are literally rewiring your brain and creating new possibilities of being. 10. Psychological freedom. You've come to the most important point of this journey, understanding that true psychological freedom doesn't come from completely eliminating the influence of the first letter of your name, but from consciously integrating it into your total personality. Jung discovered that authentic individuation happens when you become master of your own complexes, rather than slave to them. Psychological freedom is the state in which you can consciously choose when to use the patterns of your first letter and when to transcend them. It's like having access to a complete repertoire of answers instead of being limited to a single automatic script. Jung realized that truly free people do not reject their nominal complexes, but transform them into conscious tools. A person with a name beginning with A may use their natural leadership bias when appropriate, but may also choose to follow when it best suits the situation. The difference is in the conscious choice. Psychological freedom requires what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to maintain tension between opposites without being dominated by any of them. You can be assertive and submissive, controlling and flexible, independent and dependent, depending on what the situation calls for, not what your nominal schedule dictates. Those who achieve this freedom develop what Jung described as an authentic personality, an identity that integrates both programmed and consciously chosen aspects. You become a complete person rather than a one-dimensional character. The hallmark of psychological freedom is the ability to surprise oneself. When you can no longer predict your own reactions because they come from conscious choices rather than automatic patterns, you know that you are truly free. You become unpredictable to yourself in a healthy way. Jung observed that psychologically free people develop what he called adaptive flexibility. They can access any human quality when needed, strength or kindness, leadership or collaboration, independence or interdependence, without being tied to a single way of being. Psychological freedom also includes the ability to consciously use the positive aspects of your first letter when they serve your authentic goals. A person with a name beginning with C may use their natural ability to care when they genuinely want to help, but not when they are trying to control or avoid their own problems. The paradox of psychological freedom is that it includes the freedom to temporarily choose not to be free. You can consciously decide to follow old patterns when they are useful, knowing that you can always choose differently in the next moment. That's real power. Jung discovered that true psychological freedom manifests itself through more authentic relationships. When you're no longer stuck with the patterns of your first letter, you can relate to people as they really are, not as their programming makes them seem. You stop projecting your complexes onto others. Psychological freedom is also expressed through professional choices that are more aligned with their true essence. You can choose a career that expresses your genuine talents rather than just satisfying the compulsions of your first letter. His work becomes authentic expression rather than neurotic compensation. The end result of psychological freedom is what Jung called complete individuation. You become truly unique, not because you reject outside influences, but because you consciously integrate them into your total personality. You become the author of your own life, rather than just an actor in a pre-written script. The journey to psychological freedom never completely ends. It is an ongoing process of conscious choices, self-observation, and integration. But once you get a taste of true freedom, you never again accept to live as a prisoner of your own unconscious complexes. Now you have the tools. The first letter of your name no longer needs to control your life. You can consciously choose how to live, love, and create based on who you really are, not who you were programmed to be.